1. Just beds? Milo rubbed tired eyes as he passed through the many aisles of well-made Swedish furniture. How hard was it to just find a simple lazy chair? He'd been looking for what felt like an hour inside this damned Ikea, and he hadn't seen one comfy chair since. Just beds. Not even normal chairs or tables, just beds. Sure, he was taking some interest in the beds and taking his time looking them over. But could it have really been that long a time? Was he going crazy? Surely it couldn't have really been 1 hour since he entered the store. He pulled out his cell phone, pressing one of his thick fingers on the power button and reading the time. It has been an hour and a half now. He blinked his brown eyes in confusion, turning the phone back off and sliding it back into his pants pocket. He looked to each row of beds on either side of him and pursed his lips as he followed the rows down the aisle with his eyes, to see that it stretched as far as his eyes could see. He blinked again and frowned, turning back to see the same sight behind him, again going well farther than what his eyes could see. He looked above him to see if there were any signs that could help point him along his way, but what he saw shocked him. The ceiling lay far above his position, far higher than it had any right to be based on the exterior of the store. He could hardly even see where the lights were up there, but even still he could hear the dull buzzing of the bulbs. His breathing quickened for a moment before he quickly recollected himself, wiping his face and plopping down on a nearby bed. Was he tripping? He hadn't gotten high since he was a teenager, but what else could this mean? The bed he sat in groaned beneath his great weight, and it was then he noticed that it was a child-sized bed he had fallen back on. He stood quickly, turning to inspect the damage. There was a small imprint where he had sat himself, but otherwise it looked fine, and that imprint would fill back out eventually. Out of all the beds to sit on, why did he, a heavy-ass bodybuilder, decide to sit on the kiddie one? He supposed it was because he simply wasn't thinking straight. After all, Milo had just hallucinated. No, Ikea was an hour and a half walk across the building. That was crazy. He nodded to himself and turned ahead once more to get this shopping trip over with, only to see the same sight greeting him. An infinite aisle of beds. Milo frowned and looked about. Where were they? The cameras? They had to be around somewhere. This was clearly some kind of elaborate prank. He began lifting mattresses and calling out that he had figured out that he knew this was all a prank, yet no voices answered him, and the ceiling was still high above his head. His voice echoed across the store, repeating himself 3 times across its great ceiling. Well, if this was a prank, then all he had to do was prove that the ceiling was fake. Simple as. He removed his tank top, balling it up tightly in his fist and chucking it as hard as he could at the ceiling above, expecting it to meet painted resistance. Yet it kept going higher and higher before finally falling back onto his face. Milo stared in shock, not noticing the shirt bouncing off his face and rolling to the foot of a nearby bed. The tiles beneath his feet suddenly felt cold despite the shoes he wore, as did his prickling flesh. A sort of primal fear bubbled up in his spine, standing the short hairs on his neck on end. This was either a dream or real, but either way he wanted out of this damn Ikea. Taking his tank top up, he slid it back over his head and turned to the direction he had come from. He hadn't deviated that much from his straight path. It should be a simple matter of heading right back to where the exit had been. Sure, it was going to take him a long time to get back, but he was willing to spend all day walking if it meant it would get him the hell out of here. He had gains to make and shows to perform at. He had no time to be lost in an oversized meatball dispensary. He walked quickly, not taking the time to look over the furniture as he had initially. Milo had also been thinking of purchasing a new bed and had taken his sweet time looking over the inventory, not noticing the time flying by, or the lack of people, now that he thought of it. There had been no one around, not other customers inspecting wares, nor those yellow-shirt employees. No one but him. He was all alone in this massive complex as far as he knew. He walked faster at the thought. He needed to turn his focus on something else to calm him down. That was then Milo began thinking instead of his autographed Olympic bar he had received from Ronnie Coleman. It was one of Milo's most prized possessions. What would Ronnie do in this situation? He probably wouldn't be too stressed. Yeah, he just needed to focus on getting out of here and not freaking out about his current impossible situation. Milo was a beast. He wasn't scared of no furniture store. Despite that thought, he began to jog, urgently wishing to be free of this place. Yet no matter how far he ran, he saw no exit ahead of him. He slowed and began catching his breath, a sheen of sweat across his brow. He checked his phone, only to see that he had been jogging for an hour. Considering the fact that he had taken the time to stop and look at several beds along the way, he should have reached the entrance by now. It was 2 minutes till 9. Wasn't that the closing time? What was he going to do? Sleep on one of the mattresses? He looked to the array of comfy-looking beds to his left and quirked a brow. Well, yeah, he would if he couldn't find someone or get the hell out of here. He kept moving down the bed aisle until a sudden darkness overtook the entire store, leaving him in near pitch blackness. His breathing quickened as that primal fear overtook him once more, that itch in his monkey brain that made him want to run and scream like a little pansy. That would be a sight, a big 6'8" bodybuilder screaming like a sissy. If there were indeed cameras around, then he'd never live that down. He took another deep, steadying breath, taking out his phone to check the time. It was 9 p.m. exactly now, closing time. What should he do? Well, if he couldn't get the hell out of this Swedish hell realm, then he'd have to make himself comfy. He wasn't a fan of running around in the dark. Sure, he could use his phone flashlight, but Milo slapped his forehead. How could he have been such an idiot? His fingers dialed 911, and he shakily put the phone next to his ear, hearing only a slow, high-pitched beep indicating that the call hadn't gone through. He looked back at the phone to see that there was no signal. Oh God in heaven, where the hell was this place? This was supposed to be the new Ikea that had opened up in Idaho. The place had used to be a grocery store, he was sure, not an alternate Ikea hell realm created by Satan himself. Steady breaths, he told himself. He repeated the mantra until he finally reached a shaky semblance of calm. Milo wasn't about to go traipsing through the dark trying to find an exit that he was sure was no longer there. He shone his light upon a nearby bed, seeing a pillow-topped king-sized mattress. He then removed his shoes before settling in, pulling the blankets up over his head. Sleep did not come, however, his thoughts running wild and trying to come up with an explanation for his current situation. Though, nothing he thought of made any sense. He lay there unmoving for what felt like hours until he heard something shuffling nearby, like a pair of short, stubby legs hobbling along. He scrunched up his brow as he listened, cold fear freezing his breath. Short, shuffling feet, certainly, as well as something being dragged, two somethings, heavy and soft across the tiles. It made a light squealing sound, as if it were flesh being dragged across those tiles. Whatever that was, he wasn't going to introduce himself. Readying himself to kill or be killed, Milo tensed, his breathing shallow and silent as the thing slowly trudged on past him. When he could no longer hear the shuffling feet, he breathed a quiet sigh of relief, taking the blanket from over his head and sitting up in bed to look around. Nothing, at least nothing he could see in the darkness. He bunched up the blankets and pillows and squeezed himself beneath the bed frame. He wasn't sure if this really was all that much safer than just being hidden beneath the blankets, but it sure felt safer. Milo rubbed at heavy lids that would not shut and stared into the blackness from beneath the bed frame, body not untensing for the rest of the night. 2. Ikea hell. Milo was cramped and sore after last night's stay beneath the short bed frame. Hungry too, and thirsty as all hell. The lights had come back on at about 9 a.m. The sudden flood of light had caused Milo to jump and hit the back of his head on a wooden board. He had bit back a curse as he crawled out groggily from beneath the bed, his eyes leaden with sleep deprivation. He absolutely could not have possibly slept last night with how crazy this situation was, not to mention the mysterious Ikea monster he had heard trudging about last night. Milo sincerely hoped that he wouldn't run into whatever that was anytime soon. Sure, he was well over 300 pounds of muscle, but that didn't mean that he wasn't afraid of things he didn't understand. His stomach gurgled, and he almost hunched over as hunger pangs assaulted him. He needed to get something in him soon. There should be some meatballs around here somewhere, right? Milo knew damn well that there should be a food court somewhere in this madhouse, and he was going to eat everything in it out of spite. He was a big man and had a way bigger appetite. If he didn't maintain a steady diet, he could begin to lose muscle, and he'd be damned if he would let the Swedes steal his gains. With newfound determination, Milo readied himself to set forth into the unknown. Hopefully he could find something to eat around here soon. He hesitated after slipping his shoes back on, however, as a realization hit him. If he left this aisle to go find food, he wouldn't be on his straight path to the exit. And who was to say if he could ever find his way back here? What if he got lost in a tangle of infinite aisles? He scrunched his brow in thought. Wherever the exit was, it sure as hell wasn't in this aisle. Maybe he really did pass into another without noticing. It wasn't like he really couldn't find his way back to this particular aisle. How hard could it be to keep count of how many he passed through? All he really needed to do was decide if he wanted to go left or right. He came to the nearest intersection, hand on his aching gut as he peered in both directions. To his left was an aisle of tables, it seemed, and to the right he saw kitchen sets, and he heard some jazz music playing lightly from that way as well. He wasn't quite sure how far away it was based on the echoing saxophone, but it couldn't have been too far from where he was now. He began heading that way, keeping track of the amount of aisles he passed through until he finally found the source of the jazz. Much to his satisfaction, it appeared to be a food court, loaded with goodies. His mouth watered as his eyes found several steaming meatballs, freshly cooked salmon, and steamed veggies among others, all steaming up the glass behind the checkout counter. There were no employees behind the register, but that food looked as if it had been freshly restocked. He took a step forward, stopping only to note that there still was no one else around. Not even a fellow customer, though in truth he half expected that. The many wooden tables sat empty before the checkout counter, and he heard nothing aside from the smooth jazz that played over the radio installed above. The food court seemed to have its own ceiling, just like many of the displays in the aisles he passed, all separate from the mega ceiling above. How was he going to buy the food he would eat? He wasn't going to ring up himself. He cursed as he forced himself forward. Milo wasn't going to be paying a dime for any of this. His hanger overwhelmed his sense of morality as he took a big blue tray and walked around the counter to the unprotected flank of the steaming food. Milo licked his lips as he began stacking the plastic tray high with all the protein he could handle, which was a lot. The tray was soon stacked like a meat pyramid consisting mostly of salmon and meatballs, decorated with a couple handfuls of peas, carrots, and diced potatoes. When finished decking out his tray, he sat down at a pristine wooden table, leaning forward in the clean, seemingly unused chair as he began tearing into his morsels with gusto, not a single person around to stop his thievery. When he was done, he wiped at the corners of his mouth with a napkin and breathed a sigh of relief. Now that his stomach was nearly full to bursting, he just needed to drink some water. He stood slowly from the chair, feeling like a bloated muscle bag as he stormed the food court once more. There was a miniature refrigerator next to the counter filled with different kinds of sodas and juices, but Milo only had eyes for the water bottles. He snatched up a bottle and drained it without stopping for breath, tossing the container away and snagging up another to repeat the action. He had to stop himself from grabbing a third bottle, not wanting to burst his stomach open. Best to let it soak for now. He'd drink more after he sat down for a while, which he did, sitting down next to an exposed wall outlet and pulling out his phone. Almost dead, but luckily he never went without his charger. He opened the thigh pocket on his pants, pulling out the cord and slipping it into the outlet. Milo then slid the USB into place and watched as the device began to charge. He had half expected it to just not. Well, work. Considering the fact that the fridge was running and the lights were all on in here though. Well, it worked, and that was good enough for Milo. Still no signal though, and nothing. He did got his phone to reconnect. He must have restarted it 4 or 5 times, and yet nothing came of it. He shook his head and just let his phone sit next to him, leaning back and shutting his heavy eyes. Maybe he could take a quick nap, but what if whatever that thing was walked in here and found him? The thought kept him awake and alert, but his drooping eyes fought against his paranoia for dominance. A couple hours passed of him just sitting there, letting his phone charge as he let his stomach process the barrage of food he had just forced upon it. When he had more room in his gut, he snagged another water and some soda, draining them and tossing them aside without a care. Milo had a feeling that no one was going to mind in here. He thought about how he had come to be trapped in this Ikea, the ideas whirring through his head while his face hardened. Clearly, this wasn't a normal Ikea. Proud that he could state the obvious to himself, Milo nodded. Indeed, it was not a normal Ikea. He was a genius. Was this some kind of hell dimension? Had Milo died and gone to hell? No, Milo didn't really think he was deserving of going to hell. And even if he was, why the hell would hell be? Ikea? No, scratch that idea entirely. This wasn't Satan's hangout. Was it heaven? Milo winced. This just couldn't be the afterlife. It was simply too goofy to think of an Ikea as such. An alternate dimension? He winced again. It wasn't like this place could be infinite. It was just a retail store. Why the hell would it be an entire realm? Milo's brows climbed high as he had an idea. Why not get a better vantage point? He could easily climb to the top of this food court's roof and look over the aisles. After all, they didn't connect to the high ceiling above. He groaned as he stood, putting his phone and charger back in his pockets and stretching. His hanger was gone, and now that his thinking was clear, he was certain that climbing the roof was a good idea. Perhaps he could see the exit, or maybe even someone else wandering the aisles. Only one way to find out. Getting atop the roof was no issue for Milo. His limbs were all well strong enough to support and pull his great weight. The hard part was staring out across the endless horizon of furniture. Standing atop the smooth brown roof, he looked around with his jaw agape at the sheer scope of the Ikea surrounding him. He knelt down in despair and began praying to God, praying that this nightmare would come to an end and he could go back to pumping iron in peace instead of being stuck in this Swedish madhouse. Yet when he was done praying and he opened his eyes, he was still stuck in Ikea. He took a deep breath to calm himself. First step was to pray, second step was to seek, and he sure as hell wasn't going to let himself sit here and die. He stood up and collected himself, staring not at the infinite horizon of aisles and shelves, but to the nearby aisles he could see over. Milo saw every kind of desk, chair, and bed, but saw no sign hanging anywhere that read exit. There were signs, though, hanging over intersections between aisles. No exit, though, the golden sign that would free him from this retail hell. Milo drew in a deep breath and shouted as loudly as he could, "Hello?" His voice echoed far across the Ikea realm, yet no one answered his call. He tried again, and again countless times, but only his own voice returned to him. Milo sighed and moved to begin climbing down the roof when he spotted it. There to his left in an aisle of desks was a figure in a yellow shirt marching well away from Milo's position, seemingly hunched over. Whoever it was, they were too far away to discern any details other than their gait and the color of that shirt. "Hey!" Milo shouted, "You in the yellow shirt." Was it a staff member? He knew they wore yellow shirts as a part of their uniform. The employee didn't respond, simply walking forward without even pausing. Maybe this guy was deaf or something. Well, either way, he better get ready for Milo to run up on him. There was no way he was going to keep being alone in this store, and there may be a chance that they knew where the exit was. He quickly scaled down the roof and ran out of the food court toward the aisle of desks where he had seen the employee. It wasn't long before he found the desks and began running toward the employee, shouting after the fella as he approached. Surely the guy had to have heard him by now, unless he really was deaf. He ran up behind the man, for it had to be a man based on that broad torso, and almost touched him before Milo noticed the strange proportions on this figure. Long ape-like arms almost dragged across the tiled floor, ending in hands large enough to crush a watermelon, and its legs were far too short for its long body. Despite the shortened legs, this deformed man was taller than Milo by about half a foot maybe, and the most odd thing he noticed was the lack of ears on that bald head. Why would Ikea hire someone this deformed? Well, that explained why he couldn't hear Milo, but no, this went beyond just being deformed. He was inhuman. Milo stopped following when he realized that this must have been the thing, or at least one of the things that he had heard moving last night. He was only about 10 paces behind the creature when it paused at an intersection of aisles, not moving an inch more. Milo's breath caught when it finally turned back around lazily to face him. A completely smooth face greeted him, not smooth as in free of blemishes, smooth as in no freaking facial features whatsoever. Milo screamed in horror as he grabbed a nearby desk, flinging it at the monster as hard as he could. It was a big computer desk and made of wood, but the force of Milo's toss shattered the furniture across the creature's bulk, knocking it flat on its back with the sound of snapping wood. Adrenaline took control of his actions as he turned to flee, seeing that the creature was beginning to stand. Milo didn't turn to look behind him as he fled, but he heard booted feet pounding tiles behind him, and those footsteps were gaining fast. How could that thing run so quickly with such stubby legs? Milo's thoughts became a tangled mass of fear, not able to focus on anything aside from running faster. Yet no matter how much faster he ran, the thing still gained on Milo. He didn't round any corners. He just kept running in a straight line until finally he felt fingers grabbing at his tank top. Without thinking, Milo spun, now facing the back of the monster who was still running forward. It reared to a stop, almost falling over before righting itself. In a brief instant of clarity, Milo realized that there would be no running from this thing. He needed to kill it now, or it would catch him and crush his skull with those monstrous hands. So he struck out with his fist, colliding with that faceless head and knocking it to the ground before it could finally regain its balance. Its head felt fleshy, and he suppressed a feeling of revulsion at having touched the creature before grabbing another desk. This one seemed to be made of heavier stuff, and Milo lifted it over his head before throwing it down atop the creature. Unlike the last desk, this one didn't break, but the monster still lived, swiping long, reaching arms for Milo's legs as the heavy desk pinned it. Milo fell backwards as the thing grabbed his ankle and tugged. Thankfully, only his back hit the tiles and not his skull, but the collision still jarred him. It dragged him closer, throwing the desk off of itself with its free hand while it squeezed Milo's ankle to the point where he could feel the bones start creaking. Milo screamed as he reared back his free leg and kicked, the flat of his foot colliding with the monster's head and snapping it backwards. Milo struck again and again until the creature's grip went slack. Even then, he kept kicking until his breath gave out, and he fell back on his shoulders from exhaustion, sliding away from the creature as far as he could while he tried to catch his breath. His ankle throbbed with pain, but didn't feel broken, thank God. Walking on it was going to be a pain for a while, though, but he had just killed an honest-to-God monster. An Ikea beast. A Swedish demon. He was alive, and it was dead. He felt such a wave of relief that he almost cried. Milo had thought that was going to be it, that he was going to die here. He had never been so close to death in his life. Milo slowly got to his feet, using a nearby desk to stand while favoring his uninjured leg. A big red hand mark was wrapped around his ankle now, the agony of it a distant thing in his mind as he tried to come to terms with what had just happened. The creature lay on its back, unmoving as its noticeably more flat face stared at him. Or at least it seemed as if it was. He shuddered as he looked away from that horribly smooth face and down to the yellow shirt it sported, reading IKEA on the breast just beneath the navy blue collar. This was an employee of the IKEA Hell Realm? Milo shuddered again as he came to the realization that there were likely to be more of these things skulking about. He would need to be ready to fight again since he now knew that running was fruitless, especially now with his messed up ankle. Hopefully there wasn't anything broken, but only time would tell. He pulled out his phone to check the time, seeing that it was only 12 p.m. It felt like it had been so much longer than that, though. He grabbed a nearby lamp, smashing the bulb against the floor and using the thin metal pole as a walking stick. Might as well head back to the food court. He was a lot more thirsty now, and he had a feeling that he was going to be in here for a while. Might as well stock up on what he could take with him. There were some bags in the food court for takeout, right? There you go. Had a couple ideas for how this chapter should have went, and I settled on this. And before anyone says it, yes, I know that the staff are only aggressive at night, but they also become aggressive if provoked in any way. I just have a feeling someone's going to bring that up, so I felt the need to explain myself. Anyway, hope you guys have a great rest of your day and tell me what you thought.